Hello, and welcome to my much talked about, much discussed Star Wars PowerPoint. So I will be talking about all of the live action shows in this PowerPoint. And as the tagline suggests, this is incredibly long. I'd say that my PowerPoints tend to average around 50 slides a PowerPoint. This is 147. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be splitting this into two videos, mostly because I don't think my phone has enough storage for me to record this all in one go. Yes, I'm recording on my phone. I don't have a camera. Um, but yeah, so we're going to be splitting this up into two parts. So we're going to be doing the first two shows. Those are going to be in one part. That's going to be The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett. The reason that I'm doing two in the first part is because I go season by season for The Mandalorian, so that section is quite long. And then the next video is going to be the next four live action shows. So Obi-Wan, Andor, The Acolyte, and Ahsoka. So if you are, so I just warning everyone, that's the way that we're going to do it. Just literally for logistical reasons. um, yeah, I don't talk about the movies here. If you are here for me to talk about the movies, I'm sorry. I mention Clone Wars, but I don't go into Clone Wars in this one. I really am just talking about the live action shows here. So let's get into it. Okay, so I started this so long ago that my original idea was to finish this before The Acolyte came out. I'd also like to say that I have not watched Skeleton Crew. So Skeleton Crew is not on this list. I'm sorry. I started it and I got bored. And it seems like it's a kid's show. That's kind of the main thing with Skeleton Crew, is that it very much seems like it's a kid's show, which is totally fine. Fantastic, even. But as a fully formed 24-year-old adult, um, didn't really appeal to me, which is fine. I mean, if it's a kid's show, it's a kid's show. Um, but yeah, that's why Skeleton Crew is not on here. I suppose if anybody really wants me to watch that one, maybe I can give it a go, like for real, but I do not have Skeleton Crew on here. So, this was initially intended to be finished before The Acolyte came out, as a kind of retrospective before The Acolyte came out, but it has taken so long for me to actually make this that The Acolyte is now included in this. At my friend Penelope's request, I decided to do a retrospective of every Star Wars live action show. I watched all of these when they came out, and for this, and for absolutely no reason at all, I rewatched them all. I did not initially want to do this, but I was honestly curious if any of my initial thoughts about any of the shows had changed. The only show that I did not rewatch for this was Ahsoka, because I had already written quite a bit when I was initially watching it, and by God, I did not want to watch it again. So it is still included here, but it is my first watch reaction. Everything else, I felt like it had been too long since I had actually seen it for me to write something meaningful about it, so my rewatch began. I decided to watch these shows in chronological order, but to completion. So I wasn't going to watch Boba Fett after season 2 of Mando, because I wanted to watch Mando in its entirety and judge it as a show by itself. This was a large project that took me a long time. Therefore, this is very, very long. Stick with me. I will talk about the shows in chronological order of their airing, and then I will rank them. Yeah, this took me. I started this in April of last year, and then I want to say I finished in July. And then I included The Acolyte, which I do not remember when The Acolyte aired. But yeah, it took me several months to actually watch all this and then write about it. Okay, so The Mandalorian. I watched The Mandalorian first for this. I will note that for the duration of this review, I will call them Mando and Baby Yoda. I reject their proper legal government names because I think they are stupid, and better left as nicknames. For those who haven't seen the show, The Mandalorian follows Mando, and his legal name is Din Djarin, a bounty hunter and his adventures with friends, and his main companion, Baby Yoda, legal name Grogu. The show is generally pretty light on the overall story, having a mix of episodes that have overall story implications and ones that are more self-contained. Each season is 8 episodes, with episodes that range in length from around half an hour to an hour. Okay, so first I will be talking about The Mandalorian Season 1. And I remember loving the first 2 seasons of the show when I watched it when it first came out, and I was really curious if my opinion on it had changed as a result of me kind of becoming more bitter towards Star Wars in general. I have not liked much of the stuff that Star Wars has put out since Mandalorian, so I was worried that since I haven't rewatched Mandalorian in years, that it wouldn't hold up. And I have to say that I was pleasantly surprised. The first 2 seasons of Mandalorian are, in general, pretty good. I am going to go season by season to best show my thoughts about the show as a whole. Just because I feel like each season is its own beast, definitely. And if you've seen the show, you know what I'm talking about. But season 1 of Mandalorian it's the best. It's the best season of the show. My very first note that I wrote on my phone when I was watching the first minute of the show is "This rips," which is really kind of the general thesis statement for everything about season 1, is that it rips. It really does. This season simply has the sauce. I'm a professional, so I have more to say than that, but ultimately, it all boils down to it's cool as hell. It really is. Okay, Mando himself is such a good character. He is really physically imposing in this season, and he has such a strong silhouette, pictured here, that he is immediately recognizable and iconic from his first shot. He is such a physical character. We don't get to see his face more than a couple minutes overall, so we really only have his body language to go off of. Pedro Pascal does a really fantastic job at making Mando's body language really restrained, but also very expressive. You never have to worry about Mando was thinking or where his head is at because we see it in these little gestures and body movements that are really well done. When Mando goes to his ship after dropping off Baby Yoda with Werner Herzog, we see the regret in his movement, and we also see the moment that he decides that he's going back. His acting is really fantastic in the season. One reason why I like the season so much is that it is a Western. You have the Clint Eastwood style silent protagonist who is stoic, skilled, and imposing. But you also have a touch of softness in him being explored with Baby Yoda and his other new friends as well. I will note that I know that Pedro Pascal isn't the one in the suit all the time, but I know in season 1 that was mostly him. I don't remember the ratios, but I know that for season 3, I think Pedro Pascal was like barely in the suit at all, but in season 1, I think it was mostly him, which is why I'm kind of crediting him with the acting stuff. But the other 2 guys, I think, who play him do a very good job too. My hot take for Mando's character is that I wish we never really got his backstory. The one that we do get is pretty sparse. He's basically Batman. His parents die, and then he's rescued by Mandalorians. Not exactly groundbreaking, but I think that we could have figured it out, and it doesn't really add anything to his character or his circumstances. This season works really well in its mysteries and specifically with withheld information. Mando is a mysterious guy, and that's a strength. We don't know his name, where he came from, or how he got here. All we know is that he's a part of this weird group of Mandalorians, and that's it. I like this mystery quite a lot, and I will say that because his backstory is pretty minor, I'll give it a pass, but this is really more of a nitpick than anything else. Everything is paced pretty slowly. We linger on moments and also take our time to build up to specific moments. But it feels like this is inspired by the pacing that is in a lot of Westerns. It feels extremely deliberate. New Star Wars is at its best when it's exploring the conventions of another established genre. I am personally not particularly interested in new Star Wars for Star Wars' sake. It feels like we have been there, done that. There are obviously great movies and shows that are Star Wars at its purest, but I am finding that in these live action shows, I like them the best when they are also inspired by another genre to add something new and unique to the Star Wars formula that we have never seen done before. I think the desire to do something new within Star Wars for Mandalorian is also exemplified in its music. Ludwig Göransson really knocked it out of the park here, as he does every time, but here he gave Mandalorian its own distinct identity, with the music being very techno, but also having some of the Western ideas. Mando's theme is so simple and iconic, just a couple notes and you recognize it. I really like how that is used. It is also used to give new tension to battle scenes when we don't have the same orchestral score that we are used to. I really love the music here. Listen to 2 excerpts from the soundtrack so you know what I'm talking about. This is music with its own distinct identity and not tied to any sort of Star Wars legacy, which I love. So because I am uploading this on YouTube, even though this is really only for my friends, I am a little scared of YouTube's copyright. Um, so I'm not gonna play the music. If you see me present this to you in person, you can ask to see it. But basically, the 2 clips that I have here are really just, the iconic Mandalorian intro, which if you know, you know, and you can look up if you want to hear what it is. But that's really like all that I'm doing here is just the iconic Mandalorian soundtrack because I just really want to draw attention to the fact that we all know what Star Wars sounds like, but this one sounds pretty different. So that's what I'm doing here. Okay, little taste there. Okay, so another thing that works really well here is the cinematography and the set design. Everything here feels so worn and lived in. It's all dirty and grimy to represent how this is a seedy part of town. Navarro isn't a safe place. These live action shows have some really bad set design at times, so I'm taking the time here to point out when it is done well so that you can see the contrast to when it's not. The cinematography is also so good here. Shots have such cool compositions, and ooh, baby, the color grading, yummy. Like, look at this shot here. That's so fucking awesome. Like, the light coming through the door, and like, this is just such a strong composition. It's really cool. And you want to know who did the cinematography for season 1? Motherfucking Greg Fraser, whose work you may know from The Batman and both Dune movies. 3 movies with some of the best modern cinematography in the recent era. So this dude isn't fucking around. He's making good shit. And you can absolutely tell when they have someone who is creative and has a vision, does the cinematography because it looks fantastic. Like, I don't know, just the shot here too. Like, I think the season 1 looks really, really good. The CGI also looks really good. This was one of the first times that the volume was introduced, and it has really been used well here. The volume is a big room of screens that shows a background of which can help make things more realistic than a green screen when done right. The volume was also used on the Batman, but I bet the person who invented it now feels like Oppenheimer because it is used so frequently now and usually looks like shit because it seems like an easy way out. Anyway, the CGI creatures look really great. Everyone behind the scenes really popped off here. They worked very hard to make sure the season looks and sounds great. The season is just so moody and atmospheric. So I kind of have these pictures here to kind of demonstrate what the volume looks like. This is very low quality. I'm sorry. But you can see how it's just a big room with screens. So instead of green screen in the background, you have actually the screen, which helps like lighting and stuff like that. The acting is mostly really good, but I will say that Bobby Cannavale who I know as the funky spunk guy from Sex and the City, his son is not the best actor here, and he probably has the weakest episode, but I wouldn't say that it's bad. Just the weakest in a good batch of episodes. The story is also really good. It is incredibly simple, which is why it works so well. Mando has to save Baby Yoda. Neither of them have names, there is no required knowledge of Star Wars. If you have seen the original trilogy, you will be the most prepared. But honestly, I think you could go in with 0 Star Wars knowledge and be completely fine, which is very cool. I don't know if anyone remembers, but when season 1 came out right before COVID, everyone and their mother was watching it. People who had never known or cared about Star Wars were watching it because this was the show. Disney Plus started on the same day that season 1 debuted, so it was an incentive to buy Disney Plus because you could get the new cool Star Wars show. And Baby Yoda was such an unexpected hit that Disney had very little merch when he debuted. I remember people scrambling trying to find anything they could because everyone loved him so much. I remember every time he was on screen, my mom would laugh with joy because she just loved him so much. He is almost too well designed. If people didn't lose their marbles over him, then maybe the show could have ended when it was supposed to. But that's another story. This is Bobby Cannavale's son, and this whole episode. And then Baby Yoda, I remember when this episode came out and everyone was losing their mind over this shot of Baby Yoda because he's just so cute, and he really is. I also really like Cara Dune. Too bad Gina Carano doesn't know how to shut the fuck up. She's not the best actress ever, but that's okay because of how strong and physical she is, which is all that Cara Dune really needs to be. Another character that I really like is Bill Burr. I enjoy the arc that we get to see him go on, even though he's only in the show for 2 episodes. I liked his episode in the season quite a lot. It also felt very much like a Western. And it's like, oh, Mando's got to join a crew of people who he once knew in his old life before his kid changed him to get money. And he helps the crew break a guy out of jail only to have them turn on him and put him in jail instead, which is just very Western. Mando is so resourceful in this episode. It really shows how smart he is and how practiced he is with the tools that he is given. He is in a hallway with a bunch of droids and only uses his gun once. He uses every other tool at his disposal to get rid of them in creative ways, which leads to a dynamic and engaging action sequence. The action overall in the season is really well done. Scenes never feel stagnant or boring like they do in other shows. The action feels pretty visceral here too, despite the lack of blood. When Mando is fighting the stormtroopers at the end and their armor is smashing everywhere, it's violent, which is really cool. I also love the weapons that Mando has this season with his pistol and his long gun. His long gun is really cool and unique, and I love how he switches between them. I also think that sorry, I don't remember Bill Burr's character's name, but I really like how the episode looks with them and the space jail. I thought that was really cool. But yeah, it just shows how creative the show was in the beginning, which is really cool. Okay, so even though I would say that Mandalorian in general is pretty light on the story or theming, choosing simplicity and action over a meaty story, which is perfectly acceptable to me. I have been praising it for its simplicity. But one theme that I noticed that was a through line of the season was parenthood. Obviously, you have Mando and Baby Yoda, but you also have Queel and IG-11, which is really cute. It also reflects the idea of change being possible for anyone. Queel definitely has a darker past than we ever see, and IG-11 is an assassin droid who Queel reprograms to become Baby Yoda's nurse droid, which is very charming. But change and redemption are big themes for a lot of characters. Queel, Cara Dune, and Mando are all characters who have changed a lot because they are familiar with violence and cruelty and lead lives to prevent that from happening on a large scale ever again. They are familiar with death and destruction under the Empire, so their actions are motivated by that trauma and desire to change their situations to be kinder. When Mando feels sad that IG-11 sacrifices himself at the end of the season, that signifies that through him opening up to Baby Yoda, he has opened himself up to making friends in places he never expected, like with the droid. In the era of a million dad connecting with child stories, this one is actually done pretty well. It's dead simple storytelling, but it is done really effectively here, which is such a strength. I'd also like to note that it is really funny that we are in the era of a lot of dad connecting with child stories. And then, Pedro Pascal is also in the kind of other big iconic dad connecting with child shows with The Last of Us, which I do think is really funny. But that's just his bread and butter. And he does a good job at doing it. He is good as Joel. And he is good here. So just, that's funny. I also really like Moff Gideon as a villain in this season. He is used so sparingly and is very intimidating right off the bat. We also see that he is knowledgeable and knows more than he is letting on, which makes Mando feel like he's out of his depth with this guy, which is really cool. I really like the end of the season where up until then it feels like we are dealing with the embers of the Empire between some stormtroopers and Werner Herzog, who feels more like a warlord than a real Imperial threat. But then we get Moff Gideon and his TIE fighter and a bunch of stormtroopers, and we're like, oh shit, okay, this is the big league. The Empire isn't as gone as we might have thought it was. Which, like, I realize you're probably like, Sophia, like, you know what the sequel movies are, you know about the First Order. But I will say that, the First Order is different than the Empire. Even though it is very similar, it's still different. So still seeing kind of like stuff that is so imperial and proclaiming to be imperial is surprising. I'd also like to note that when I saw this for the first time, Moff Gideon with the black lightsaber, I was really excited. That excitement is not there anymore. She's gone. She's gone. They killed the excitement I felt, which I will get into later. But Overall, I really like this season a lot. It is genuinely some of my favorite Star Wars. It has a really wide appeal, and absolutely no background knowledge is necessary, which is really cool, especially since it was the first Star Wars thing to come out outside of the big movie franchise. Um, Sorry, the first live action thing. Clone Wars had come out sooner, but this was the first like live action thing to come out of the movie since outside of the movies. To make Star Wars that is stripped down, no Jedi, no Force, no big plot, and focus on a new character in a new part of the galaxy. There's a Tatooine mention, which like I'll let slide, but mostly we are on planets that we have never heard of before with people that are brand new. It was incredibly refreshing and welcome. I genuinely believe that anyone can watch it and enjoy it. Mando himself is a really strong character who is easy to like. Baby Yoda is charming and adorable, and it's just overall a really great season of television. Check it out if you haven't seen it already. This is, yeah, definitely genuine recommendation. Season one is really good. Um, I also think that uh, I know that people know this, but Dave Filoni also worked on Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it's really cute that Mando has blue triangles on his hand, just like Aang in Avatar, which is really cute. That I really like that kind of homage to his past work, especially something outside of Star Wars, and especially something like Avatar, which is universally beloved. So just thought I'd point it out in case anyone didn't know. Okay, on to Mandalorian season dose. Season 2 is expanding on the arc that Mando went through in season 1. He has begun to open himself up to others through friendship, and now season 2 expands on that, pushing him even further outside of his comfort zone. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth about individual episodes here because I have praise and criticism that does not extend to every episode. Okay, Mando season 2 is still good, but absolutely a harbinger of bad times to come. This season opens on a really great episode that is more explicitly Western than anything that season 1 did, which was awesome. Mando goes to help Timothy Olyphant, whose name I don't remember, whose character's name I don't remember. If you know how I talk in real life, you know that I don't always remember character names, but I do remember actor names. I continue to do this throughout the presentation, I'm sorry. But Mando goes to help Timothy Olyphant and his backwater Tatooine town deal with a big monster problem. They have to plan, strategize, and then fight the monster, which is a very simple premise, but it rocks. Mando is tough and capable, extremely entertaining, and really well done. I think that the Boba Fett bait is fine at the end of the episode because it is the Boba Fett bait during the episode is fine because it is quickly revealed to be Timothy Olyphant. And I also think expecting audiences to know who Boba Fett is fine. This season does away with the zero homework necessary, but not completely. If you don't know who Boba Fett is at all, then the scene still works. Mando sees another Mandalorian, but then he takes off his helmet, so he isn't who Mando thinks he is. The audience expects Boba Fett when he takes off his helmet and is surprised when it isn't him. Both interpretations of the scene have the same conclusion, which is why it works so well for me. I also think that Timothy Olyphant having the busted up speeder, which looks like it used to be a pod racer engine, is fine too, because it's used more as an Easter egg for fans without any plot relevance. Easter eggs are fine. I need to know that Easter eggs are fine. But once the eggs hatch and you have a fully grown Thrawn, that's when I take issue with it, which again I will get into later. This episode also had the aspect ratio change, which is so good. I love a cool aspect ratio change. And it's really cool to see for the first time when you're not expecting it. Like when this scene happens and then this like the sand dragon or the crate dragon, sorry, like comes out and then the screen gets wider. So cool. Such a cool effect. I really liked it. Also, very Dune with the sandworms. But hey, that's okay. There's a lot of similarities between Dune and Star Wars anyway. This was the first thing that I had watched of Star Wars since watching Dune because, I had watched the Star Wars movies as a kid. I have never seen the David Lynch Dune movie, and I hadn't read the book before the movie came out. I have since read the book. And so this is really interesting. I kind of like look at Star Wars after having watched Dune because it's like, oh, It is just Dune. George Lucas did steal quite a bit, but then, this episode does take even more from Dune, I think, than the original Star Wars does, which is fine. I think it's fine. It's not like blatantly stealing, the worms. When you get sandworms that work differently, I guess, but I still like it. I still think it's good. So episode 2 was my least favorite of the season. This is where we get into the territory of shit that could have been a Clone Wars episode, which is by far my least favorite kind of Mandalorian episode. The reason for that, despite me loving Clone Wars, is that I believe very strongly in each show having its own identity. None of the previous episodes of Mandalorian could have easily become a Clone Wars episode because it was all distinctly Mando's story. It worked for him because the show was made with him as the main character. But having Mando deliver 2 space lizards and their babies to another planet so they could give birth and running into problems and finding face huggers in a cave is very Clone Wars. The show also works best when it's playing with genre, and this episode is definitely far more sci-fi than Star Wars. It's like sci-fi and Star Wars far more than Western. Overall, I was a little bored with this episode. Again, it's not bad, but it's still not the best ever. I think I disliked it more this time around because I was aware of the issues in the show that are coming and saw this again as a bad omen of the kind of more boring episodic stuff becomes a worse problem later, not a problem now. Okay, so this season has begun with the cameos of characters from other Star Wars iterations. The Boba Fett cameo at the end of season 1 almost doesn't count because we just see him for a short time as a teaser, and then once he becomes a character later in the show, that is when I could see him more as like a part of the show, which I will get into when I talk about the episode when he comes in. The first real glup shitto that I would count is Bo-Katan. For those who don't know, I will be using the term glup shitto as a reference to the meme here, every time a new Star Wars movie or show is announced, all the fans are like, OMG, Glup Shitto is back. Yep. So Glup Shitto is a term that is used to identify your relatively unknown and insignificant fave that is from the Star Wars Extended Universe. Bo-Katan's inclusion in this show initially made me excited when I saw this for the first time because I was interested in what this would mean. Now, revisiting this episode, I simply feel annoyed because I know that her inclusion is again a bad omen to come. I will admit, though, that her inclusion in this show at this specific moment does actually make sense in the episode. Mando needs someone who he can trust who can give him information on the Jedi. Bo-Katan is a good character to use in that place because she is Mandalorian, and Mando will trust her more because of that fact. And also, she has a past with the Jedi and can lead him in the right direction. It is also not mandatory that you know who she is from Clone Wars. I would argue that it helps you understand the full scope of everything going on, but the show does present you with the necessary information to understand who she is. If you have not seen Clone Wars, then you do not know how she knows Ahsoka or who Ahsoka is, but I would argue that who they are outside of the context of Mandalorian doesn't matter in Mando's story or within this show, so I have no beef with it. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is that I don't mind Bo-Katan's inclusion in season 2 in this specific episode because the show is giving us, if the show is giving us enough information to work on. It is kind of like framed as something significant, and if you don't know who she is, you could be annoyed. You're like, who the fuck is this bitch, and why does the show like kind of make her seem important? But because Mando doesn't know who she is, and this is still very much from Mando's perspective, then they don't, then, the information that Mando receives is enough for the viewer to kind of go forward. So I think it's fine. So I have to be consistent in my criticism, and the one tenet that I will preach throughout this presentation when it comes to cameos and references to other Star Wars things is that if the character is explained properly within the new show, and it does not depend on the viewer already knowing who the character is, without the show being a direct sequel, then I am okay with it. Obviously, there are exceptions that I am fine with. Luke Skywalker needs no introduction. But to assume the viewer has intimate knowledge of who characters are outside of the most obvious is something that I find incredibly annoying and something that makes some of these shows irredeemable in my eyes. We will get more into this later, but I feel it is important to set up my criteria now so that you, the viewer, can see examples of Glup Shido usage that I find acceptable and usage that I do not. I will occasionally dip into my knowledge of the extended universe to prove a point, but I am primarily interested in these shows working within their own merits, especially Mandalorian, that has a first season that has no bar for entry. The fact that no one has ever seen a creature like Baby Yoda and no one knows what to make of him makes me wonder if the Jedi were actually prominent figures or how much access people had to knowledge of the Jedi. I always assumed that they were known in a similar way that politicians were known, especially Yoda, who was Grand Master Jedi for centuries. But I guess there are backwater planets who have people born after Yoda's reign. Maybe on Coruscant they would know more about him, but figures who are more connected, like Bo-Katan, doesn't seem to know what he is either. So I don't know what the continuity is here. Minor nitpick, doesn't really matter at all, but it is a little strange that everyone is confused by Baby Yoda, and they're like, "What is this little guy?" It's like, don't you know Yoda? Anyway, I'm gonna go into episode 5 a bit more because I think this is good and bad Glup Shido usage, and I want to illustrate my point here. However, I need to say that overall this episode is really good, even now. When I first saw this episode, I had not seen anything Japanese and didn't know until afterwards that it was extremely inspired by Akira Kurosawa and other classic samurai stories. Um, which is why I'm wearing my Godzilla shirt. Even though Godzilla is not exactly a direct inspiration for Star Wars, but Godzilla is a direct inspiration for the Zillo Beast episodes of Clone Wars, which those episodes rock. Anyway, now I have seen quite a bit of Japanese TV, if you know me at all. I got all my little anime guys here, and I've seen quite a bit of Japanese TV and movies in the time since this has come out, and I could immediately recognize the influences this time. I was also hot off Shogun, so I was definitely samurai pilled when I saw this, and I enjoyed that quite a lot. The episodes definitely isn't a western, but it is a samurai story, which is one of the other core inspirations for the original Star Wars. So dipping into this genre is great for me. It's totally acceptable. The setting is incredibly moody, but also very Japanese. The village looks all run down and shabby, and then you see it in the magistrate's garden, and it's beautiful and a sign of wealth. The action in this episode is really great too. It tells a simple story of a Ronin liberating an oppressed people, which I just love. Again, Mandalorian is at its best when it's simple. I actually don't mind that Ahsoka is used here at all, which may come as a surprise if you know how much I hate the show Ahsoka. But I think she is perfectly acceptable here. Because who she is outside of the show doesn't matter at all. She is simply a Jedi who survived the Purge. Her history with Anakin and the Clone Wars does not matter at all. Her being a former Jedi is the only thing that matters, and that is something that we gather immediately because she has lightsabers and uses the Force. She can give the necessary guidance to Mando and Baby Yoda. Now we know his name, which is Grogu. I will not call him that. About how she cannot take him on, but that maybe someone out there would. Mando asks Ahsoka to take Baby Yoda because she's a Jedi and Baby Yoda has Force affinity, and she says no, but that she knows someone out there who could take him. If you do know who she is, then you are not hindered in any way from fully understanding. If you do not know who she is, then you are not hindered in any way from fully understanding her role within the story. The magistrate is here and kind of a reference to the Night Sisters, but I think that is stupid, and therefore I do not count it as real. And it is also never brought up seriously. The one Glup Shido usage that I do not like here is that Ahsoka asks the magistrate where Thrawn is. Thrawn will continue to be the thorn in my fucking side throughout some of these shows because no one wants to tell me who this motherfucker is and why I should care about him. Ahsoka name drops him, and that is entirely dependent on you knowing who she is talking about. Because if you haven't seen Rebels, the animated kids show on Disney XD that started in 2014, or read some of the books, then you do not know who she is talking about. Now, I would forgive this if we got some knowledge about who he is later, or even in Ahsoka's show. But I digress. I will talk more about Thrawn when I talk about the Ahsoka show. Believe you me, I'm not leaving that motherfucker alone. But this episode is meant to tease. It's more of a teaser, so it's more forgivable because who Thrawn is or is not does not matter. If you don't know who Thrawn is, like me, when Ahsoka is fighting with the magistrate and she's like, "Where's Thrawn?" You're like, I don't know who that guy is. And it doesn't matter at all to the rest of the story. So it's annoying, sure, it's like not the most fun thing ever. But, if you don't know who Thrawn is, it's literally a 2-second conversation and then the show moves on and we don't hear from him ever again. Sorry. We don't hear from him again this season. We do hear from him again in season 3, which I will get into. But that's why I think it's more forgivable because I would still put this in the Easter egg category because it's not really significant to the plot of Mandalorian yet that we know who Thrawn is. So Ahsoka being like, "Where's Thrawn?" Like, okay, like they're trying to set up the Ahsoka show, which is fine. And Thrawn, Thrawn name drop is, I suppose, this is the only acceptable Thrawn name drop that we get in all of Star Wars in these live action shows. So I can overlook it because it really is very quick and then it moves on. But I still don't like it. It still bugs me. But I will go into him more later when I talk about season 3 of the show and when I talk about Ahsoka show. Okay, in the next episode, we get Boba Fett for real. He has absolutely no point in this story outside of people being like, "Hey, that's Boba Fett." He does get a pretty cool fight scene, but he does not matter here at all. What are his personal stakes in this? Why is he here? Who cares? I wish that one of Mando's already established friends or a completely new character had come to help him out of this planet to defend Baby Yoda before he gets taken off by Moff Gideon. I also really dislike that they exploited Mando's iconic ship in this episode. I really liked that ship, and I liked how it made Mando unique himself by going back to the core idea of Star Wars. Cool guys with busted, run-down, sick as hell ships. That is why everyone that's Han Solo's whole fucking appeal. They replaced his ship with the motherfucking ship from Phantom Menace, which is probably the second most offensive thing that ever happens in the show, and I genuinely hate it down to the core of my very being. That Mando has this tiny Naboo ship that is not practical at all, just because it reminds people of the fucking Phantom Menace. I never want to be reminded of that movie. Why would Dave Filoni think that I want to be reminded of the Phantom Menace? Really? Fuck you. Sorry. I'm gonna keep getting heated in this because really nothing gets me more heated than some of the shit that happens in these shows. Okay. Episode 7 is us back on track, baby. This is what I'm talking about. Now, while this episode isn't an exploration of genre through Star Wars, it does dip its toe into true capital W war, which I enjoy quite a bit, and you will hear me talk about more in Andor, why I like kind of that idea. I liked that this episode introduced some grayness over if either the Empire or the Republic are truly right. Mayfield and Mando were driving the big truck throughout the planet, and Mayfield was commenting on how the people of the planet don't care if the Empire or the Republic is in charge because it means that they are being ruled by someone very far away. I really like that kind of light moral grayness that is being introduced here. It's like, how different are the Republic and the Empire really when they were ruled by the same dude? Bill Burr does have a point there. That's what his name is. Mayfield. Me of the past remembered what his name was. Okay, it's dipping its toes into the whole idea that maybe the Republic isn't quite as cool as we may have originally thought. Palpatine did rule both, and both eras were at war for quite a long time at the end there. War happens no matter what the rulers call themselves, and while other Star Wars media does go into this grayness a bit more, it's really cool that this is in Mandalorian, and we haven't gotten anything more than an action adventure in Mandalorian up until this point. This is really only one line that I'm thinking way too much about than I probably should, but I still thought it was cool and contributes to why I like this episode so much. I also really like how Mayfield has been bugging Mando to take off his helmet every time he sees him since season one. And then when Mando is actually forced to take off his helmet, he doesn't feel any satisfaction from it. He has to take his helmet off in order to gain access to the terminal that tells them where Moff Gideon and a recently kidnapped Baby Yoda are. In that moment, Mando has to make a decision about if he is going to sacrifice his moral code that he has lived by since he was a child, or if he's going to give in to the Empire's demands. I think Mayfield doesn't get any satisfaction because Mando breaking his code is another thing that the Empire is taking from someone. I also enjoyed the conversation that Mayfield and Mando have when the Imperial officer guy who was Mayfield's general during the days of the Empire. Mayfield can't help bringing up the platoon that this guy's orders killed just to see if he feels any regret or distress over causing the deaths of hundreds of loyal soldiers. And when Mayfield sees that he doesn't have any regret, he kills him because he can't bear to leave him alive, which is really cool. That whole conversation is so tense. Mando and Mayfield end up escaping, and then Mayfield blows up the whole base, which is justice for his old friends, giving him closure for something that has clearly bothered him for a long time, which is really cool. This episode is very cathartic for Mayfield and Mando, both showing themselves where they stand in this war and amongst themselves. This episode is so good while also being very Star Wars, as it shows new things about the characters in a more subtle way. I also think that treating the Empire as more serious works to great effect here. Episode 8 is the finale of the season, and it has some things that I think are good and some that skirt the line of what I find acceptable. I need to state for the record that one of the things that remains good throughout these first two seasons is the music. Ludwig Göransson puts his whole Gorissi into the music, giving the show its own unique identity, and it is really highlighted well in episode 8. I actually don't mind the Luke cameo here. Obviously, Luke Skywalker needs no introduction. It is completely fine to assume the audience knows who he is. I just seriously wish they hadn't CGI'd his face. Especially when this episode came out, he looked like a weird CGI monster. They went back in and fixed it, but it still doesn't look real. It absolutely dips into the uncanny valley. I wish they just cast someone who looks like Luke Skywalker. We would have been able to figure it out. Hell, cast Sebastian Stan, who looks just like young Mark Hamill. His voice also sounds like an AI, which is so entirely distracting. I also like that Mando doesn't give a fuck about the Mandalorian succession. He really only cares about getting his kid back, which is awesome. Also, I will say that the impact of Mando giving up Baby Yoda to Luke to train him does not have anywhere near the kind of impact it did when it first came out, because you know that Baby Yoda just comes back. So the sacrifice doesn't mean anything because Mandalorian became too popular for its own good. It couldn't end at this point. They had to bring him back because everybody loves Baby Yoda. I really didn't like that the impact isn't there. Closing thoughts on the season, I overall liked it a lot. I don't think it was as good as season one, though. It is sad that the careful approach that they took towards cameos, knowing that people might not have seen Clone Wars and giving viewers the necessary information to figure out who this character is and their role in the story is only done in this season. The only cameos without explanation are Boba Fett and Luke Skywalker. I don't love the Boba Fett cameo because it does really feel like he has no point in the story and he's really only setting up his own show. Luke is fine though, so I will say that I do like the season, but it is, again, a bad sign for what is coming. Okay, Mandalorian season 3. Season 3 is here, and I never actually watched it all the way through until I did for this. I watched the first 2 episodes and realized that the quality had taken a massive dive, and that I wasn't interested in watching anymore. Now that I have actually finished it and see what happens, I will say that I don't think it was quite as bad as I initially thought, but it is really bad. There were some things that I enjoyed this season, but I have to put an asterisk next to most of the things I enjoyed because I didn't enjoy it completely. Let's start with the absolute worst thing that this season does. It has Baby Yoda and Mando reunite in the Book of Boba Fett. What the actual fuck were they thinking when they did that? They were obviously thinking that Boba Fett was going to be just as popular as Mando, so it was a safe assumption that everyone who watched Mando would also watch Boba Fett, like the Marvel movies did. But then that didn't happen, because of course it didn't. Do they not care about the continuity of their own show? If someone is watching the show for the first time and they don't know that they need to watch 2.5 episodes of Boba Fett in order to understand how the 2 main characters reunited in this show, then it would be bizarre that the show reunites them without explanation. You mean to tell me that I have to watch Boba Fett in order to find out what happens in season 3 of a whole other show? Fuck off. I think the MCUification of the Star Wars show is annoying at best and downright offensive at worst. And this is absolutely the worst thing that the structure does. Another thing that was horrible about this is that you mean to tell me the 2 episodes that Mando and Luke with about Mando and Luke just couldn't have fit into season 3. We really needed that Jack Black and Lizzo episode in season 3. There was simply no room to find out how Mando and Baby Yoda reunited. And they replaced the ship with the stupid fucking yellow Phantom Menace ship for no reason other than nostalgia for the fucking prequels. Suck my nuts. Every decision they make in the interim between seasons 2 and 3 was the absolute wrong decision. One of the biggest reasons that I turned the show off and didn't finish it when I first watched it was because it is a massive downgrade visually. You can tell from the very first scene that they do not give a shit about anything being interesting with the presentation anymore. They were like, those suckers are going to tune in no matter what, so why take the time and energy to actually make it look good? For some reason, they decided that they were going to have the rest of the Mandalorians really colorful. I have no idea why they did that, and now it literally looks like a CW show, so I truly don't know what they were thinking. This first scene also does something that becomes a prominent issue throughout the rest of the season. It is clear that they don't have much material to make into episodes, so every time they need to pad the episode for time, a monster shows up for them to fight. This is literally just to make sure the audience doesn't fall asleep during the episode and also give everyone something to do. In the first 2 seasons, the appearance of monsters all had a very deliberate purpose. It would either show something new about the characters or push the plot forward. There's absolutely nothing new that we establish or anything that matters with the monsters in season 3 of Mandalorian. Again, look at how colorful they are. Why would they do this? Also, look at the lighting. It literally looks like shit. Anyway, also, this dude is Pax Vizsla. I will mention him later. Pax Vizsla has a son he wants to protect. I literally don't give a fuck. Another thing that I strongly dislike in this first scene is that Mando wants to get back in the good graces of the other Mandalorians so bad. Why? Because they don't have anything else for him to do. I feel like a lot of his arc in seasons 1 and 2 was about him branching out and making his own friends. And then at 2 moments in season 2, he chooses his found family over the strict code of his original family. Every time he takes off his helmet for Baby Yoda, that is him actively choosing what is most important in life, and that maybe the strict code of the Mandalorians doesn't always work for him. And then in the beginning of season 3, they have him being like, "Can I please go bathe in the living waters of Mandalore? Will you like me again?" Number 1, what are the living waters of Mandalore, and why do I give a fuck about them? Mind explaining? Oh, it's an old Mandalorian tradition. What does that even mean? Number 2, this is not the point of where Mando was going in his growth. He had outgrown the other Mandalorians, and I deeply wish that the season was about him and Baby Yoda going out and having adventures on their own and maybe making new friends. Instead, Dave Filoni loves Mandalore too much for some reason, and this whole season is going to revolve around Mandalore. Also, while I am addressing Mr. Filoni, why make Mando from Concordia? Because from Clone Wars, not many people actually live on Concordia. It is mostly just Death Watch, which Mando's sect of Mandalorians are definitely not Death Watch, because Death Watch was never about this strict of a code, and even if it's like a sect of Death Watch, it's a different thing from what Death Watch was in Clone Wars. So the Mando's crew now are not terrorists like Death Watch. So this is an offshoot of Mandalorians? So it's like you have Mandalore, and then you have the offshoot of Concordia and Death Watch, who lives on Concordia. And then Mando is a part of an even smaller group of people who may be split from Death Watch. Why? Why are we doing this? Okay. Mandalorian culture is like Mando's third cousin by this point. That is a nitpick, though, not completely important. But it's also like, if Mando is like 3 cousins removed from actual Mandalorian culture, then why does he need to bathe in the living waters of Mandalore? Like, why does Mandalorian culture matter at all to Mando when he's literally like 3 steps removed from Mandalore itself? It's like, why does he give a fuck? Anyway, I'm now going to go into my most nerdy nitpick criticism of seasons 2 and 3, where you really need to indulge me going into Clone Wars knowledge. But don't worry, unlike the show, I will explain myself. So if you haven't seen Clone Wars, that's fine. I will explain it. While I did previously praise the show for not requiring much background knowledge on who Bo-Katan is, I will say that because I do have background knowledge on who she and the other Mandalorians are also acting in a way that I genuinely don't understand, which makes me sad and angry. I don't like how there was literally no tension over who was going to get the Darksaber, because Mando doesn't give a fuck about Mandalorian succession, and Bo-Katan obviously cares. So the whole thing with the Darksaber drives me insane. Allow me to do a bit of Clone Wars recap for a second so that you can really understand what I'm talking about here. Okay, so for those who haven't seen Clone Wars, full spoilers for the whole show. We spend a really decent amount of time on Mandalore, learning about Mandalore, its history, and its current setting in the Clone Wars. During the time of the Clone Wars, Mandalore is ruled by Satine Kryze, Bo-Katan's older sister. She is the leader of over 1,000 independent systems who wish to remain neutral during the Clone Wars. We get to see quite a bit of Satine and who she was. She's actually the ex-girlfriend of Obi-Wan. Fun little tidbit. They met when he was a Padawan, when he was assigned to protect her for a year, and they developed a romantic relationship. They broke up because Obi-Wan did not want to leave the Jedi. He tells her years later that he would have left if she asked, and she replies that she never would have asked. She has a very strong sense of duty and is willing to sacrifice her wants and desires for the good of others. Throughout the show, Satine is fighting incredibly hard politically with both the Republic and the Separatists, wanting to stay neutral. She has quite a bit of power, and both sides want to recruit her. She survives assassination attempts, terrorists, and invasion. That's what Bo-Katan looks like in Clone Wars. The actress who plays her in Mandalorian is actually her voice actor. So that's pretty cool. I like that. But yeah, and then that's Satine, who is the queen of Mandalore. Meanwhile, Bo-Katan is on Mandalore's moon of Concordia, being a high-ranking member of the terrorist group called Death Watch. Death Watch hates Satine and the peace that she stands for. They want to return Mandalore to its warrior past, and they see the peace that Satine fights for as a sign of weakness. Bo-Katan attempts to overthrow and kill her sister throughout the run of the show. The leader of Death Watch is named Pre Vizsla. He is the former governor of Concordia, working closely with Satine before he betrays her by leading Death Watch to overthrow her. Pre Vizsla is the first person we see to have the Darksaber. At one point in the show, he brags to Obi-Wan that his ancestors stole it from an old Jedi temple, because the Jedi think they're so great, but anyone, even those who don't follow the religion, can use the Darksaber. Mostly the Darksaber exists to be something really fucking cool in Clone Wars. Pre Vizsla using it is mostly a middle finger to the Jedi, but also it gives him a bit of a status amongst the rest of Death Watch. No one can challenge his power because he is a good fighter, and also because he has the Darksaber. Towards the end of the series, Pre Vizsla aligns with Darth Maul and his apprentice Savage, as they agree to help Pre Vizsla take over Mandalore. Darth Maul wants to use Mandalore as an entry point into him becoming a crime lord throughout the galaxy, and he will allow Pre Vizsla to rule in his stead on Mandalore as a figurehead. During their conquering of Mandalore, Darth Maul kills Satine. Things then go south between Pre Vizsla and Darth Maul, as Pre Vizsla fights back against some of the decisions that Darth Maul is making for Mandalore. Darth Maul kills Pre Vizsla in combat, beheading him with the Darksaber. He then keeps the Darksaber because he thinks it's cool and because it symbolizes his control over Death Watch. Bo-Katan is cautious of Darth Maul, but ultimately she is on board with the rebellion. However, after Darth Maul kills Satine and Pre Vizsla, she helps Obi-Wan escape and leaves Death Watch, joining Obi-Wan and Ahsoka as they attempt to liberate Mandalore from Darth Maul's rule. That is the entire history of the Darksaber that we see in Clone Wars. I don't know if there's anything else in the books. I don't fucking care about the books. That's all just published fan fiction. It was an ancient Jedi artifact that has absolutely no connection or history with Mandalore itself. It has a history with the Vizsla family, but not Mandalore. It actually symbolizes control over Death Watch. So the entire time in The Mandalorian that Bo-Katan desperately desires the Darksaber and says she cannot return to Mandalore without it, no one will accept her as the true ruler, she's not telling the full truth, because it is actually a Death Watch idea. that the Darksaber has any kind of sway over who is leader. And that only started with Pre Vizsla. Deathwatch has been around longer than Pre Vizsla. He was just the first person who had the Darksaber that we see. We don't really know if Deathwatch has been around for anything longer than what we see, or if the Vizsla family has been leading Deathwatch for generations. We really don't see that. It's a safe assumption to make, but I really am just going based off of what Clone Wars deliberately tells us. The only time that it was used in a passing of power, again, that we see, was between Pre Vizsla and Darth Maul. And even then, it was more symbolic than anything. Darth Maul enjoyed being able to flaunt Pre Vizsla's favorite toy in front of his subordinates, reminding them that he beat their beloved leader in combat. It was never a symbol of true power over Deathwatch, even. It was mostly just because Darth Maul liked it. Even if Darth Maul had killed Pre Vizsla and chucked the Darksaber off a cliff, Deathwatch still would have followed Darth Maul because Pre Vizsla was dead. At a point in Clone Wars, Palpatine comes to Mandalore to fight and kill Darth Maul and Savage because he recognizes that they are becoming an actual threat to him as they amass power. Darth Maul uses both his lightsabers and the Darksaber in the fight, and Palpatine sees that even more defiance against him. That he is using a lightsaber that he did not build and that he has, and which gives him more power. However, during the fight, with Darth Maul is disarmed of the Darksaber because it is not as useful as his actual weapon. It is a hindrance in a way. So even amongst those with actual power, it is kind of seen as a joke. The Darksaber goes against Jedi tradition because the Jedi do not hand down their weapons to anyone. They do not have children, and also they build their lightsabers themselves as a rite of passage. So for anyone besides its creator to use it would spit on Jedi tradition, which, we have seen before. Luke uses his father's lightsaber, but it's not exactly something that is within Jedi tradition, especially at this point in history. The fact that it is that in Mandalorian, Bo-Katan has made the Darksaber a big symbol of Mandalorian tradition, despite the fact that she knows that's not true, also spits on real Mandalorian succession. Bo-Katan has a perfectly legitimate claim to the throne as she is of royal blood and the only living relative of the previous Queen of Mandalore, unless you want to count Corky. But that's like a fan theory, that's not anything real. Her blood alone is the best and most legitimate claim to the throne. The fact that she needs the Darksaber to legitimize her claim to the throne is actually closer to Deathwatch tradition. Again, a terrorist organization working to overthrow the rightful Queen of Mandalore because they do not like peace. Bo-Katan is spitting on her sister's legacy. Everything that Satine fought and died for, a modern Mandalore, one that is a leader of peace, one that led all these neutral systems in the Clone Wars, means nothing now. Is history and tradition more important than peace? What Mandalore was when it died is gone forever, because one of the only people who remembers what it stood for, doesn't agree with that perspective and wants to carry over Deathwatch traditions, the group that overthrew the previous ruler and put an actual Sith Lord on the throne. It is so sad to me that everything that Satine fought so hard for is completely ignored by her sister, who wants to return Mandalore into something that she wants, instead of what it actually was. Bo-Katan is trying to honor Mandalore, but she is fighting for the warrior past of Mandalore, which hasn't been around in a long time. They say they hate Jango Fett because he stole their armor and is giving Mandalore a bad name by fighting across the galaxy. Bo-Katan is fighting to create Pre Vizsla's version of Mandalore, a terrorist who sold out to the Sith so he could have power and violence. She is honoring what he fought for, and not what her sister fought and died for, or the true Mandalore, what it was before it was bombed to fucking hell. So that even after Bo-Katan left Deathwatch, she now fights to restore their rule to Mandalore. It's fucked up that she's trying to create a Mandalore that uses a tradition that was born through violence and death. When Darth Maul killed Pre Vizsla and kept the Darksaber, it was a symbol of his rule of Deathwatch. Again, he killed Satine to take over Mandalore. And obviously, we can't get into all of this in Mandalorian. In fact, I don't want them to. But it is weird that no one remembers or honors the Mandalore that was. Bo-Katan continues to spit on her sister's legacy by not fighting for the Mandalore that Satine died for. Moff Gideon, Bo-Katan, and the other cells of Mandalorians that we meet during the season all value the Darksaber, which means they were probably Deathwatch. Mandalore wasn't Deathwatch. It was something entirely different, yet the new one will be more like the terrorist than the peaceful Mandalore. And I feel like I need to state that I do love Clone Wars. It is some of the best writing and characters that you will see in Star Wars. So when I say a storyline from Clone Wars that is not carried on in a way that is of the same quality as Clone Wars, I do get upset. That is where a lot of this comes from. Please watch Clone Wars. If I have a viewing guide, if anyone is interested, please watch it. It's really good. This whole storyline is fantastic in Clone Wars. It's so good, so good. But yeah, it just makes me sad. I don't know. The other big issue with the season, okay, back to Mandalorian season 3, we are out of our Clone Wars break. The other big issue with the season is that it completely does away with anything related to genre that the previous two did. Now, it is just plain old boring Star Wars that we have seen before. They aren't interested in doing anything new or interesting or following the history that Mandalorian established as being a Western. The soundtrack also isn't very interesting. It feels very much like generic Star Wars. Episode 3 of season 3 does something that I both like and dislike. This is the first episode where we don't see anything of Mando or Baby Yoda. Instead, this episode follows the doctor who worked with Werner Herzog in season 1 and Katie O'Brien of Love Lies Bleeding, who worked with Moff Gideon after they were captured and taken back to the Republic. This episode looks at how they adjust to Coruscant after having been reprogrammed and living with other former Imperial people. This episode does delve into territory that we haven't seen before. The time of the Republic after the Empire isn't really a time that has been explored too much in a movie or TV show. So we really have no idea what they did with all the ex-Imperial people before the rise of the First Order. It goes into what that kind of loss of identity would be like and having to be at the bottom of a totem pole with no say. We focus more on the doctor, who was really only Imperial so that he could have access to equipment and funding that would allow him to conduct his own research into organ cloning. So now that he is in the Republic, he can't do anything that he wants to. And it's interesting that a noble cause would kind of drive someone to the Empire. And then when he's back in the Republic, which is, what we see is the more noble, the good guys, he doesn't have access to that information anymore because of the consequences of his actions. So Katie O'Brien notices how he feels stuck and offers to help him go to find an old Imperial cruiser and help him steal some old equipment. They go, and then at the end of the episode, we see that Katie O'Brien has turned the Doctor into the Republic. Now, this is actually really interesting. It feels like a short story that you would read in high school English class that you would actually enjoy reading. The idea of looking into how lower-ranked Imperials acclimate and how they feel is a really interesting concept. The episode is a little slow and a little cliche, and I will say that it was my favorite episode of the season. However, I strongly believe that this shouldn't be a Mandalorian episode. This should really be its own show, or if they wanted to do the episode, just make it a short film. Because Mandalorian is not at all interested in politics involving Coruscant. That is not the identity of the show. It feels like they ran out of ideas, so they turned the season into Clone Wars. Because that show is an anthology and it lets them do whatever ideas they want, and it fits the structure of that show. This isn't the only time that this season reminds me or where an episode makes me think of Clone Wars. The Jack Black and Lizzo episode is so Clone Wars. Bo-Katan and Mando are on a planet, and Jack Black and Lizzo want them to find out who was hijacking their former battle droids, and it turns out it was the head of security. Oh my god. It is so odd and feels so much like mid-Clone Wars, where Anakin and Ahsoka would have to solve this. They even act a little bit like them, with Mando hitting robots to see who is hijacked. It was so early Ahsoka that it kind of did a double take. Bo-Katan and Mando play good cop, bad cop for some reason. The guy who did it declares he's a separatist, which really doesn't make much sense because who likes them? Why is there so much prequel bullshit? I truly don't understand that a show that is set this far after the prequels would draw so much from them. I don't like it. If it pulled from the original trilogy, I would be less mad because that makes more sense chronologically. The end of this episode looks like it was filmed in a local park. I hate this shit. It looks so ugly. Okay, the dirty secret that Clone Wars fans hide is that not every episode is good. And again, because of the structure of the show, you do not need to watch the episodes that aren't the best. That was only possible because it had 24-episode seasons. I strongly advocate that Mandalorian should have a longer season with worse quality episodes. I want longer seasons with worse episodes made by people who are paid more to work less, and I'm not kidding. I'm being very serious here. If Mandalorian was more of an anthology, but allowed them to be more action adventure and also have some mid-ass episodes without me becoming pissed at the show in general. Okay, the rest of the season is mostly boring. It's people talking and then a monster shows up. Mando is living with the other Mandalorians after he regains their favor very quickly. And then Bo-Katan just kind of hanging out there too. No idea why she's there. No idea why she decided to join the cult and then keep her helmet on for a bit there. Bo-Katan has such a huge role this season, and it's very weird that Mando just kind of takes a back seat. He also declares his loyalty to her at one point. Bro, why the fuck do you care? I don't buy them as friends. Mando has been reduced to Bo-Katan's hand. Give him a pin and he's no different than Tyrion, and Bo-Katan is Daenerys. Mando and Tyrion both drink stupid juice when they meet a ruler who they are backing for some reason. Mando himself is a very simple character. He's not Tyrion, which worked because he became a vessel for other stories to be told near him, but he's also still the main character. If you remove Mando from the Bo-Katan plot this season, it changes nothing. Um, yeah, like obviously Tyrion is a much smarter character than Mando is. Um, but hey, both of them become stupid. So I don't like that. I hated the end of this season. It was literally so boring. The fight sequences are pretty uninteresting. Moff Gideon is wearing an old Death Watch slash Darth Maul helmet, which, okay, he was interesting because he was mysterious, and he's just been around way too long at this point. Moff Gideon talks about Thrawn with his board of other Imperial people, which looks like Sele, by the way, which pisses me the fuck off even more because, like, is Thrawn coming back? We need to wait for him to come back. He will be our savior. And then Gideon's like, he's not coming back. Let's move on. I am once again asking these Star Wars shows to tell me who the fuck Thrawn is and make me care about him. He is the absolute worst glup shithead that these shows reference, and then they forget to introduce him to the audience that would establish him as a character outside of a reference to fucking rebels or some books. Because you absolutely cannot assume that anyone knows who the fuck he is. The reference here is such a fucking joke because they treat Thrawn like he is the fucking emperor. And then like, oh, he's a big deal. Suck my dick and balls, motherfucker. I do not know who he is. I go into this way more when I talk about Ahsoka, but just knows that it drives me ballistic here, even this like 2-second conversation. Because it drives me even crazier that this is happening in a show that was originally beginner friendly and had no bar for entry. And now it name drops Thrawn not once but twice. Like, you are supposed to know who he is. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, I really don't know why this show changed so much from something that was so easy to get into, that you didn't need to know anything, to something that almost requires you. It's like it requires you to know a lot. And they keep mentioning Thrawn. Like, why would anyone, it's like, I don't know, this was so wide, it had such a wide appeal, and now it has lost that wide appeal to appeal to Star Wars nerds, which, like, Star Wars nerds have a ton of shit. They have a ton of shit going for them. What you really need is something with great wide appeal, which is what Mandalorian was. So it's really extra sad. And it's not that anymore. Which is why I think I hate the Thrawn references even more. But, I hate Thrawn in general, but, like, come on, really? Gideon also has a really anticlimactic ending here. Like, they have been building him up to do something really nefarious and evil, and then they just destroy his clones before they can do anything. And then, even after all that, after everything, the Darksaber is just destroyed by, like, a hand moving weird, which is so incredibly lame because Bo Katan is just kind of chill with it. She's like, yeah, so relight the old forge. Girl, what are you talking about? You wanted this thing so bad for 2 seasons, and then when it's destroyed, she's just like, oh well. Huh? Was this a way to get rid of the weird plot hole that they wrote themselves into? Which nobody else has, I guess, paid attention to other than me, but I guess that's me. I guess Bo-Katan doesn't have to struggle with her remaining allegiance to a terrorist cell's traditions, which contradicts her sister's dream of Mandalore, or they don't have to explain the entire Mandalore arc from Clone Wars, which would be long, tedious, and boring. It just feels like they realized they accidentally made an oopsie and were like, okay, let's destroy it and then not draw too much attention to it. Because if Bo-Katan had actually lost her one true route towards succession, then I think it would have been a bigger deal. Okay, so to put an ending on this incredibly long section, that is all about one show. I'm sorry. Mandalorian started as something new and exciting and is continuing down the path of simply being something generically Star Wars. It is really sad to see this downward spiral as it has become too popular for its own good and lasts longer than it should have. I would still wholeheartedly recommend season 1 and 2 of Mandalorian to anyone who likes Star Wars. However, if you want the best viewing experience and ability to see it as a complete work, then just stop after season 2. Season 3 is absolutely not worth it, and it is really boring that it exists overall. And it makes me mad. Okay, on to the next show. Book of Boba Fett. Let's get into it. Okay, the Book of Boba Fett is not the worst that these shows get. Rewatching it has shown me that it is actually not bad as some shows. It is definitely not good, but it does not reach the lows that others do. This show follows Boba Fett and Fennec, her, after they killed Bib Fortuna and took over the crime syndicate formerly run by Jabba the Hutt. This is a good idea on paper. As I have previously stated, the best of the new Star Wars are ones that engage with genre. So having a Star Wars show that engaged with the mafia genre could be really cool. Imagine a Godfathers or Goodfellas in Star Wars. That sounds cool as fuck, right? Well, I hope you didn't get too excited because this show does not do that. For some reason, they are really attached to making Boba Fett a nice crime lord. He's not into violence too much. He wants everyone to like him, and he always is being the good cop to Fennec's bad cop. It is really interesting to have a morally gray character or even a morally bad character like Walter White in Breaking Bad or Tony Soprano in The Sopranos head a show. But Boba is far from that. In fact, he's pretty righteous, which is fine, but he's supposed to be leading a crime syndicate. They are allowed to make him a little meaner. The one thing I like about the show is how it flashes between Boba now and his life after the Sarlacc pit. That is kind of cool. The problem is that the flashbacks are actually more interesting than the current time. I might be the only one who thinks that, but that's kind of my perspective. We see this journey that Boba goes on where he learns to care about this group of Tusken Raiders to save him. We then see him react to not being there when they're all killed and how he has to go on this revenge mission to kill the people responsible. That's actually kind of okay. The pacing is pretty bad overall, and there are certainly some things that aren't my favorite, but I generally don't mind it. We see a whole arc for Boba to go on and how he changes as a person. But again, this is all before the current time of the show. So I wish that the show focused more on his actual change than after the change has happened. It also feels strange that Boba would go on this whole arc where he learns to value others and how he may not want to be a bounty hunter anymore, but then he just immediately goes and makes his own crime syndicate? It really doesn't make sense that this man who valued the Tusken Raiders and their traditions would then seek out power and illegal influence. My favorite episode focused on Boba, with him and Fennec breaking into Jabba's palace to get his ship back. It had a goal with what it wanted to do, and it was actually pretty fun with how it went about it. But then we get more stuff in the present of Boba negotiating with the mayor of Mos Espa. Enthralling. One thing that is a major detriment in the show and remains in most of the worst of these shows is that for some reason they make everything clean and the people have money. This is Tatooine, the backwater of the galaxy. In New Hope, we see how everywhere on Tatooine is dirty and dingy, even in Mos Eisley, the biggest city on the planet. No one has money, everyone is poor, unless you are Jabba. And even then, his palace is pretty grimy. But for some reason here, Mos Espa is pretty clean, and most people have some money. They have the casino where everything is nice and clean, and everyone working there has very nice clothes on. It's so strange why they chose to do this aesthetic. My theory is that it was easier than making things feel lived in and dirty, probably cheaper too. Another indicator that the planet has money is with the stupid British biker gang, biker enhancement gang. Despite their aesthetic dramatically clashing with everything that we have seen on Tatooine for forever, I have two main issues with it, or two other main issues with it. One is that this is an indicator of money. We have seen these kinds of implants that they get in Star Wars we have never seen these kind of implants in Star Wars and have no range for how expensive they would be. But because they haven't shown up before, it leads me to believe that this is something that is rare and expensive. In other shows like Cyberpunk Edgerunners, the main character David lives in a society where most people get some kind of implants. And when he gets his first one, it's a big deal. However, he was never able to get one before because he had no money. And granted, he didn't exactly pay for the one that he did get, but it was still expensive and rare, and everyone knew and took note of it. The type of implant that you got and how you used it was all really important and showed interesting aspects of the characters. In Boba Fett, he just brings Fennec to this enhancement shop that looks like a tattoo studio, throws a bag of coins like a pirate, and is like, fix her. Like, what do these enhancements do outside of medical care? And why is this the only motherfucker in the galaxy who does it? Another main issue I have with the enhancements is that they never fucking use them. The main girl always shoots her tiny gun with her normal human arm, and we maybe see the guy with the crazy eye thing use it as a binocular once. That is so deeply lame. To draw attention to another use of enhancements that is done well is in Mad Max Fury Road and Furiosa. In Fury Road, we see how Furiosa has really honed the war rig to be her own, and her prosthetic is important in that. We also see her create it in Furiosa, and we see that it actually has a tiny engine that she can rev and get more power into her arm when she needs it. There are a lot of characters that have enhancements and modifications, and even though we don't see how everyone is used, we all know that they perform two main functions: practicality and style. Obviously, the style of the Mad Max universe is iconic and super cool, so most of the actual design of these characters is supposed to look cool as fuck. But we also know that there's a practical use for it too, because most people have some kind of physical mutation as a result of the nuclear fallout. So no one questions why they are there. We, the audience, are never told these functions, but you can figure it out incredibly easily. When characters don't have modifications, it draws our eyes and tells us that is something different. Modifications are used in the story and have actual consequences for the characters. Why does this particular British biker gang have modifications? It is so lame when something exists to be cool and then it just fails and isn't cool at all. Mad Max excels stylistically, and the story is mostly an excuse to make these people look cool as fuck, and they do. All of Mad Max like really rides on the cool factor being just as cool as possible, and it works. So yeah, when people don't have modifications like Max or like his wife, I'm blanking on his name, the it's literally on the tip of my tongue. I know what his name is. But his wives don't have any modifications either, which, which is why he's reproducing with them, because he wants to have children without modification, because he thinks that maybe they'll be able to do it. Um, but yeah, so it's really annoying that the British biker gang has this gear, but they don't use it at all when they could. It's really weird. Okay, the rest of the show looks like dog shit too. The lighting is so stale and boring. I never thought I would become a lighting snob in my life, but after watching early Mandalorian that had really cool lighting to season 3 of that show and Boba Fett, it makes you realize how boring lighting can make the rest of the show really boring visually overall. There's no atmosphere or mood, everything's just brightly lit, and before you say Sophia, that's just how desert planets look. A New Hope doesn't look like that. It is lit way cooler than that, and everything has a mood. Even Force Awakens is lit better. Like, look at the difference between these two shots. Yes, they're different planets, but like, this is so boring. This is very boring lighting. This is cool. Okay, now we got to talk about the Mandalorian stuff in this season. I have already talked about how offensive I find it that they decided to put the Mando and Baby Yoda reunion in this show. But the actual episodes have their ups and downs. The first episode that we see of Mando is 100% Mandalorian. We do not see Boba Fett at all in that episode. When the episode starts, we actually see Mando doing bounty hunter work. Yay! And the fight in the meat locker is actually super cool. The fight was like OG Mando and was highly enjoyable. Mando has the sauce in this scene. We see him struggle with the Darksaber, which would be cool in a vacuum, but would be far cooler if he actually used it in his actual show. The blacksmith is really critical for Mando not being able to properly use the Darksaber. The blacksmith is really critical of Mando himself not being able to like properly fight with the Darksaber. which is literally fine. When a guy who has never used something sword adjacent and is meant for a person who has access to a specific special ability that Mando doesn't have, if he struggles to use it at first, then that is to be expected. Pre Vizsla would routinely get his ass whooped by anyone who had lightsaber training because he was not properly equipped or trained to use it. Paz Vizsla was like, "Oh, my ancestor forged this lightsaber." Yeah, bro, for himself. And that was literally 1,000 years ago. Jedi make lightsabers for themselves. So I don't think some kind of family bond gives you any more claim to it. When bro shouldn't even have had a family that gave a shit about him or knew he existed in the first place. Family is, in fact, the least important thing to a Jedi. And therefore, there is no such concept of inheritance. So, him trying to pull the family card, sorry, dude, that is not legally binding and also doesn't matter. Mando also gets a stupid new fucking ship in this episode, which I hate. But I will admit that the scene with him actually making it with Princess Carolyn, sorry, that's her in, the actress's character in BoJack Horseman. I don't remember her name in the show. And every time I hear her talk, I'm like, hey, that's Princess Carolyn. So I'm just going to call her Princess Carolyn. It was really funny and endearing. If only this was a new ship that made sense practically and wasn't Phantom Menace bait, then I would actually like this whole scene. It's like he traded in the minivan for a two-seater Ferrari, forgetting that he still needs to drop the kids off at soccer practice. The second episode of Mando is the second episode of Mando season 2.5 shows Timothy Olyphant having a showdown with some spice dealers, which was pretty cool. Very Western. A note about spice. After seeing Dune, it's really funny that spice is obviously really important in Dune and not really that important in Star Wars, outside of just being a generic drug. But it really is funny that it does look the exact same too, and then we just never find out what it does. At one point, Boba says that he needs to get rid of spice because it's destroying people, but like, we literally never see it doing anything to anybody. It's destroying people, but Mos Espa has more money and cleanliness than anywhere else on Tatooine. Fuchs is from Barry. Fuchs gets some water stolen by the British biker gang. Spice is really destroying the people. Is that the conclusion that we're supposed to draw? What the show is telling me does not match with what the show is showing me. And then if I had a nickel for every guy named Timothy who kills people over spice on a desert planet, then I would have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that I have them twice. Okay, I also really don't like Luke in this episode. Yes, he continues to look and sound like a computer, but I also find him to be exceedingly boring. But I will admit, he is kind of funny. This dude just really fucking loves stone huts. When you watch The Last Jedi, you see Luke on this planet with old stone huts, and you think, oh, okay, he just stumbled upon this old Jedi area that's had some old ass huts, because it is basically an archaeological site. But it turns out that no, Luke's home design aesthetic is actually just old, cold stone huts. Even the Jedi on Coruscant lived in the Jedi Temple. They had these tiny ass rooms in order to discourage attachments, but they lived above the surface in this really beautiful building. They didn't live like priests or nuns. They abstained from connection and attachment, not all worldly pleasures. The Jedi are certainly not opposed to using a tax dollar to build a very nice building. And then Luke goes to start his own school, and he's like, yes, step 1, like the Jedi used to do, cold, old, stone, tiny huts. Like, dude, your sister is a wealthy politician. If you need money, you can ask for it. Unless he asks for money from his sister for 50 robots that can physically only make the smallest, saddest, coldest huts imaginable. And he wondered why his Jedi school wasn't successful. Ben Solo, with his rosy red cheeks of youth, finds out he gets to live with his cool gay uncle now, and then he sees that he now has to live without indoor plumbing, central heating, air conditioning, running water, or a stove, all because his uncle just likes living with like that for some reason. Bitch, I would go to the dark side too. Luke gets a hold of one super ancient Jedi text that has a diagram of this dude's crib, and looks like, well, that's the way the Jedi did it, not knowing that that dude was also the person who invented fire and cave painting. I really don't know why they did this. Like, why is he doing this? It's really weird. I also really hate that Ahsoka is here. She had to be like old Obi-Wan and be intentionally really vague with Mando and Baby Yoda when they came to her for help. She has to be like, oh, go to this planet and go to this rock and use it like a radio amplifier and project your force presence throughout the whole galaxy. Maybe someone will answer your call. She couldn't have been like, hey, I can't take on the kid. I have a little bit too much going on, but my buddy Luke is actually establishing a school for Force kids. Here's his address. She just had to make it way more complicated, and of course, Baby Yoda had to get kidnapped. I also very strongly believe that she shouldn't be here. If she is truly too busy to take on a kid, then why is she just hanging out with Luke? I also don't get why she would be concerned with establishing a Jedi school just the same as the last one when she had major beef with the last one. Luke doesn't have any experience with the old one, obviously, so he can't know some of the ideas the Jedi taught didn't always work practically. But Ahsoka knows. Why is she letting Luke teach no attachment when it didn't even work for him or for her? Ahsoka's attachments to Anakin and Obi-Wan during the Clone Wars were essential to her and were incredibly foundational for her growing up. Anakin taught her to disobey orders from the Council when they're wrong and to take care of those around you. Anakin showed her that attachment isn't wrong. She even had a boyfriend for a bit who was a separatist. Anakin and Obi-Wan showed their love and support, and she valued their input greatly. Did Anakin's betrayal and Obi-Wan's disappearance make her change her mind and say no attachment is better? If so, then that's really sad. But also, Luke cannot give up his attachment to his sister and friends. It is, in fact, a whole plot point of Empire Strikes Back. He abandons his training for them. So why the ever-loving fuck is he teaching it now? Still, I don't buy that the Ahsoka from Clone Wars would completely cast off any attachment at all after that. Why is she letting Anakin's son teach that attachment is wrong, especially when he has his own attachments that matter to him? Why is she letting the mistakes of the past continue? If she wasn't here involved at all, I would be like, okay. But her being here and silently watching Luke make a big mistake is strange. I don't know why adult Ahsoka is so silent, stoic, and like the Jedi of old. She has seen the destruction of the Jedi Order and has traveled all throughout the galaxy afterwards protecting people. And you're telling me that after all that time, all the people she's met, all the lives she's saved, she has learned that being silent and not interfering is the best strategy? Why is she acting like the Jedi of the Republic when she has had absolutely no influence from them since she was a teenager? Why, when she was younger, she saw what the Jedi had become and decided that she didn't want to be a part of that. She walked away from the Jedi Order. And then she becomes just like them, even despite having no influence from them. I will go more into this in her own show, but I find her personality to be really strange, and I don't like that she just becomes what we expect a Jedi to be rather than who she actually was. This episode with Luke training Baby Yoda is the first time that I would say that true nostalgia from the originals is being milked, which is shocking for when the show is set, but there is more. It's shocking for when the show is set that there's more prequel bait than original bait, but whatever. I don't like any of it. My biggest issue with the things in these shows is that they are meant to evoke similar feelings to when we watch the OG movies or the prequels, is that most of the time that reference loses all impact than the initial action did in its initial source material. This is one of those instances that shows what I'm talking about. We see Luke training Baby Yoda in the same way that Yoda trained him in Empire. But if we go back to Empire, that scene had an actual point. It was introducing both Luke and the audience to what the Force was, because nobody knew what it was up until that point. Yoda introduces Luke and us to what the Force is, how you feel it flow through you, that is a largely mental thing. Luke's own hesitations about his strength is what stops him from lifting the X-Wing from the swamp, not due to any actual real lack of ability. We are introduced to the Force as a mystical thing that is a tool for Luke to use. And then when we look at the scene in Boba Fett, it is just meant to show us that Baby Yoda is learning about the Force. It doesn't tell us anything about who Baby Yoda is as a character. We see that the main obstacle that is stopping him from being stronger is his age, which we already knew. He has a pretty good grasp on the Force for someone who has the mental capacity of a toddler. Why is Luke training an actual baby who isn't able to speak yet how to use the Force like he's a grown-up? And Luke gets frustrated with him. Even Yoda at the temple waited until the kids were elementary school age before he actually started training them. So Luke's approach of, here's what worked for me, I don't see how it won't work for him, is kind of insane to me. Like, Luke should be showing him some Force tricks and maybe teaching him some stories. He's like, Baby Yoda just wants to play. Yeah, no shit, dude. Encourage him to play. That is what teachers do in preschool. You establish basic concepts through games and simple interactivity. We learn this episode is, we leave this episode on a cliffhanger of, ooh, will Baby Yoda accept Mando's gift and choose to go back with him? Or will he stay with Luke and accept Yoda's old lightsaber? Side note, giving Baby Yoda Yoda's lightsaber feels like giving a loaded gun to a baby. But hey, what do I know? But it's like, oh, gee, I don't know. Let's watch season 3 of Mandalorian and see what Baby Yoda chose. Stupid. The next episode is back to Boba and Fennec trying to gain control over their territory. For some reason, this is now all about spice. Boba is very anti-spice because spice runners killed the Tusken Raiders, who were his homies. Fine. That would indicate to me that he would hate the Pikes, the group who are drug running spice all over. Not necessarily that he would hate the drug or the profit it brings. But no, he says we can build a prosperous Mos Espa without it. Dude, with what import or export? Last time I checked, Mos Espa doesn't exactly have any tradable goods. You need to think about your bottom line here, man. How are you going to pay any of your workers without business? I guess that is a problem for season 2, the accounting book of Boba Fett. Cad Bane is in this episode, and by God, does he look busted. Cad Bane is, as a character design, obviously works best in animation. He does not work in real life. He looks clunky, unnatural, and worst of all, sauceless. Which is why they should have just designed a cool new bounty hunter to work for the Pikes if they wanted this so bad. Speaking of the Pikes, I hate how there has been like 2 minor scenes of build up to this big territory war between Boba and the Pikes. Throughout the rest of the show, his beef was with the Hutts, and now it's with the Pikes for some reason. Everything in this last episode is really bad. The sets look bad, the CGI looks bad, the characters all look and feel like actors. This fight is so long and is overall really boring. Why do we have these big machines that look straight out of the prequels? Why is Boba on a Rancor fighting these robots? It is a miracle that they were able to make that boring, but they did. I honestly don't have much to say about the last episode because it didn't really leave much of an impression on me. The biker gang continues to be funny. There was a fight. Baby Yoda and Mando were reunited. Shocker. We knew that. Overall, I'd say that the show has some things that were fine and some things that were bad. This isn't my least favorite Star Wars show, but its biggest crime is being boring and underbaked, which is common in a lot of these shows. How honestly, I think this show has better art direction and more consistent world building. I would probably forgive some of the bad writing and weird choices. It's not like bad writing is something exclusive to this. Star Wars is rampant with bad writing. I truly think the way the show looks is one of the worst things about it. It is painfully boring. But I will say I wasn't quite as offended watching this as I was for other things, so it's not the worst. Okay, this is the end of part 1 of this video, and if you would like to watch part 2, then go to that video where I will be talking about Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, the Acolyte, and Andor. Okay, cool. Thank you so much.